All right, let's dive deep into yogic treatments and natural remedies. It's like unlocking these ancient secrets, about health and healing, but from like a totally yogic perspective.
Yeah, and it's fascinating how this book goes way beyond just like, take 2 aspirin and actually makes us think about our well-being in like a whole different way.
It's not just about symptoms, right? It's like getting to the root cause of what's making us sick and then like restoring that balance, in our bodies and minds.
Yeah, totally. Like a holistic approach.
Exactly. So you ready to like explore the yogic view of how we digest and stuff?
Absolutely. I'm really curious how they connect like what we eat to our overall health.
Well, they put a lot of emphasis on how food impacts our blood and not just like calories. The book really gets into how the stuff we choose to eat affects like the acidity and alkalinity of our blood, which in turn impacts our health.
That makes me think about all the times I've just like mindlessly eaten without thinking about, how it affects my system.
I know, right? It's a total eye-opener. And get this, they're big on chewing properly.
Chewing? Really?
Yeah. Apparently, it's not just about breaking down the food. It's about stimulating saliva, which they say is super important for the liver.
Huh. So it's like, what, priming the engine before you start the car?
Exactly. They also talk about this concept called rasa, which is basically like the good stuff that forms from digested food.
Okay, so what happens if we don't digest properly?
Well, that's when this rasa doesn't form the right way and leads to indigestion or like what they call dyspepsia. It's all connected,
So what causes incomplete digestion? Is it just eating too fast, or is there more to it?
Oh, there's way more to it. They mention things like eating too much, indulging in those rich or heavy foods, and even not moving enough. And stress. Don't forget stress.
Wow, you wouldn't think those things would affect our digestion that much.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Right? But it all adds up and impacts our health in the end.
It really highlights like how interconnected our body systems are.
And speaking of interconnectedness, there's this great saying in the book. It's Bengali, I think. It goes, drink milk at the end of the day, drink water at dawn, drink curd water after the noon meal, then what need for a doctor?
I love that. It's so simple and to the point.
Right. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. Okay, so let's talk about dyspepsia, which I'm sure we've all experienced at some point. The book has some pretty specific do's and don'ts when it comes to dealing with it.
Okay, lay it on me. Am I going to have to, like, drink weird concoctions or chant or something?
Well, some of the remedies are definitely unique, but first they talk about dietary restrictions like avoiding non-vegetarian food, except for small fish.
Okay, that makes sense. Cut out the heavy stuff.
Yep. No meat, eggs, or intoxicants either.
Makes sense. Those can be hard on the digestion.
Now, here's where it gets a little interesting. They recommend only eating when your right nostril is dominant in breathing.
Wait, what? Your right nostril?
Yeah. Apparently that's when your digestive glands are like most active.
Wow, I've never even thought about that.
It really makes you think about the subtle ways our body works,
It really does.
They also suggest fasting on certain days like Ekadashi, Purnima, and Amavasya. They're lunar days observed in Hinduism.
So giving your digestive system a break, basically.
Exactly. And now for those remedies you were asking about, ready for this?
Hit me.
Asafoetida, cowrie ash, and myrobalan powder. What do you think?
Not your average drugstore finds, that's for sure. I'm
Yeah.
curious to learn more about how they're used.
We'll definitely get into that more later. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about hernia. You might think it's just a physical thing, right? But this book suggests it's linked to like undigested food and pressure from gas and even too much acidity in our blood from eating too many, non-vegetarian and fatty foods.
So it's saying that what we eat can actually contribute to like a physical hernia, not just from like lifting something heavy.
That's exactly what they're saying. It's all about those imbalances,
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Makes you want to really pay attention to what you're putting in your body.
And for treating hernia, they suggest a mix of yogic practices like mudras and asanas, and of course dietary changes. Things like Utsopa Mudra, Jasvini Mudra, Mayurasana. Have you heard of those?
Some of those ring a bell, but I'm not sure how they'd help with a hernia.
They don't go into too much detail, but they emphasize portion control, avoiding constipation, and choosing foods that won't cause, too much gas or acidity.
So basically creating an environment where the body can heal itself, right?
Right. And now just a quick touch on appendicitis and acidity.
Okay. What do they say about those?
Well, for appendicitis, they basically treat it like dyspepsia, but with some extra restrictions, like avoiding fibrous foods and a type of rice called atapa rice.
So they see a connection between the two conditions?
Definitely. and for acidity. Get this, they link it to irregular and excessive eating habits. They say it messes up your system, leading to all this harmful acid and poisonous gas.
That's wild. Makes you think twice about that late night snack, huh?
For real. And get this, they even link acidity to rheumatism and colic.
Wow, so it's not just a tummy ache. It can have like far-reaching effects.
Exactly. Now let's talk about hemorrhoids or piles, a topic I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. The book describes all these different types, like developed, external, internal, bleeding, even dry piles.
Wow, they really break it down. So what do they say causes piles?
They point to constipation, poor liver function, and even things like lack of exercise and too much, well, sexual indulgence.
It all comes back to that holistic view, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about treating the symptoms. It's about looking at your whole life. And of course, they have dietary recommendations. They mention things like arum, curd water, figs, and this thing called manakaku.
Those are some pretty interesting suggestions. Definitely seeing a pattern here. Lifestyle choices, mindful eating, and natural remedies.
It's all connected. Now let's discuss syphilis, which I know can be a sensitive topic.
Yeah, definitely. Important to be respectful.
Absolutely. The book describes 3 stages of syphilis and how it can affect different elements in the body, like vayu, pitta, kapha, and blood.
So even within one disease, there are variations based on like individual constitutions.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the individual and tailoring the treatment to them.
Can you explain a bit more about those elements you mentioned, like vayu, pitta, kapha?
Sure. They're like the fundamental energies in our bodies. Vayu is like the wind. It's all about movement and energy flow. Pitta is the fire. It's about digestion and heat. And kapha is kind of like the structure and stability and also fluids.
Oh, so it's about keeping those energies balanced, right?
Exactly. And when they're out of whack, that's when problems arise, like syphilis.
That's fascinating.
Now, for some interesting remedies, they mentioned treating mercury spots. I think they're related to syphilis with bakudano paste or a mix of papaya and bell leaves.
Huh. That's definitely different from modern treatments.
Yeah.
Very resourceful.
And here's a really unusual one.
Yeah.
Curd and Trisha juice to, and I quote, destroy the poison of syphilis. I need to do some research on that one.
It's amazing how they used plants to address all sorts of ailments.
And speaking of, let's move on to cancer, a disease that still baffles modern medicine. The book describes it as a disease of the whole body, affecting all 3 doshas, vayu, pitta, and kapha.
So not just a localized problem, but an imbalance in the whole system.
Exactly. And get this, they link things like constipation, laziness, lack of self-control, and even bad sleep to a higher risk of cancer.
So basically, living an unhealthy lifestyle makes you more susceptible.
That's what they're suggesting. And then they connect depleted shukra, remember, that vital life force,
Yeah.
and acidic blood, to cancer development. It's like when your core energy is weak, you're more vulnerable to disease.
Makes sense. What do they recommend for treatment?
They're big on alkaline foods, milk, and breathing practices, replenishing that energy and restoring balance.
Sounds familiar. Giving the body the tools it needs to heal itself.
Now let's talk about leprosy, which thankfully isn't as common these days. The book describes 3 stages of leprosy and how it affects all 7 elements of the body. Chyle, blood, flesh, fat, bone, marrow, and shukra.
Sounds pretty intense.
It is. And they attribute it to things like poor nutrition, contaminated food, and a weakened immune system. Basically, anything that compromises your body's defenses.
So building a strong immune system is key.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Embrace yourself for this one. They suggest living near rabbits as a traditional remedy for leprosy.
Wait, what? Rabbits?
Yeah, it's an interesting suggestion, to say the least. It's important to remember, though, that these are traditional beliefs, and it's always best to consult with the doctor for proper treatment. So much to uncover, right? We've barely scratched the surface. There's still emaciation, eczema, seminal weakness, paralysis. We've got a lot to cover in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait to dig in. All right, so we're back and ready to explore more of these yogic treatments and natural remedies.
You're right. We've just started to, scratch the surface.
There's so much more to uncover. What about emaciation? What's their take on that?
Oh, they definitely talk about emaciation. They explore all sorts of causes, for both kids and adults. Things like malnutrition, weak digestion, and how certain diseases can impact it.
So it's not just about being thin. It's like a lack of, vitality or something.
Exactly, with a weakness in the whole system. They even talk about how emaciation in children can be from not enough mother's milk or starting solid foods too early.
And for adults.
Oh, It can be a whole bunch of things like too much mental exertion, problems with the genital organs, or even chronic illnesses.
So different stages of life, different causes.
Makes sense, right? Now let's switch gears to eczema, that skin condition that can be so uncomfortable.
Ugh, yeah, I've had eczema before. It's no fun. What do they say causes it?
They link it to, get this, weakened blood, often from things like dysentery.
So, like, your whole system is compromised, and then, bam, eczema.
That's the idea. A weakened immune system makes you more susceptible to those eczema germs, I guess.
It all comes back to that interconnectedness, you know? One problem can create a domino effect.
Totally. Building up that immune system is key. Now, let's talk about something that can be a bit delicate, seminal weakness.
Ooh. Yeah, that's a topic people don't always want to talk about.
It can be a bit hush-hush, but the book approaches it in a very, matter-of-fact way.
Yeah.
Just focusing on the physiological effects of seminal loss, without any judgment.
That's good. It's about health, not morality.
Right. They talk about how a lack of sexual knowledge can contribute to it, and of course, excessive seminal loss and, unhealthy lifestyle choices in general.
Makes sense. So basically, being responsible with your sexual health is part of overall well-being.
Absolutely. And they get into the potential consequences like weakened brain function and just a general loss of vitality.
Because your energy is depleted.
Exactly. Okay, let's shift to a completely different topic, paralysis. It can have such a huge impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. And it can be caused by so many different things.
The book explains how it all works, with the brain, the nerves, even high blood pressure playing a role.
It's like a breakdown in communication between the brain and the body.
And they go deeper into different types of paralysis and their specific causes. Nerve damage, blood acidity, even an overactive Manipura chakra that's like an energy center.
Oh, interesting. They're bringing in the chakras.
They even talk about mental paralysis, where specific areas of knowledge are affected. It's wild.
It shows how connected our physical and mental states are. Now, what about ulcers? Those can be really painful.
They are. The book talks about both gastric and duodenal ulcers and how the pain relates to, when you eat. They point to undigested food, weak digestive organs, and acidic bile as the main culprits.
So again, it comes back to digestion.
It really does.
Yeah.
And they don't sugarcoat the potential complications either. They talk about bleeding and perforation, which are serious stuff.
Definitely not something to mess around with. All right, what's next on the list?
Gallstones. Those little troublemakers that form in the gallbladder.
What causes those?
They say it's all about impurities and excess acid building up in the gallbladder, basically turning into stones.
So like a toxic buildup.
Yep. And they emphasize the role of the liver in all of this, how it filters the blood and produces bile. It's all connected.
And for treatment.
Rest, alkaline foods, and fasting, all about giving the body a chance to reset and heal itself.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah, there's definitely a pattern. Okay, how about goiter? That's a condition that affects the thyroid, right?
Right, and it can be pretty noticeable too.
The book connects it to shukra deficiency, remember, that vital essence, and weakened glands. It's like when your core energy is low, your glands can't function properly.
Interesting. So it's not just a thyroid problem, it's an energy problem.
That's what they're suggesting. And for treatment, they recommend iodine-rich foods like milk and certain fruits.
So nourishing the body from the inside out.
Now let's talk about gonorrhea, which can have some pretty serious consequences if left untreated.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. It's important to be safe and get tested.
Definitely. The book describes the symptoms and the long-term effects, like infertility and even blindness. They emphasize strict abstinence after treatment, calling it Yaogika Carya.
It's about protecting yourself and others.
Absolutely. And they mention some specific remedies, uche, palta, neem, and sajne. Ever heard of those?
Some of those ring a bell. I'm always amazed by how they use plants for medicine.
Okay, let's move on to diabetes, a condition that affects millions of people.
Such a widespread problem these days.
They actually differentiate between two types. Somaroga, which is diabetes with sugar in the urine, and motratisara, which is diabetes without sugar.
Huh. I didn't know there were different types like that. What do they say causes it?
They link it to a weakened liver and problems with pancreatic juice, basically an imbalance in those organs.
So again, it's about internal imbalances.
Yep. And for treatment, they recommend a balanced diet with alkaline foods and regular bowel movements, keeping things moving,
It makes sense. Now, what about deafness? That can be a really isolating condition.
They actually say that deafness is often a result of other health problems. like a domino effect,
So treating the underlying issue is key.
Exactly. They list a bunch of possible causes like certain medications, malnutrition, intoxicants, and even, seminal loss.
Wow. A lot of different factors can contribute to it.
It's crazy, right? Okay, let's talk about hydrocele, which affects the scrotum.
That's a condition you don't hear about every day.
The book describes the symptoms and says it can be caused by either internal factors like seminal decomposition or external factors like injuries or even improper bathing practices.
So both internal and external causes can lead to it.
Right. For internal hydrocele, they recommend a practice called Vasti Kumhaka, along with proper bathing and a balanced diet.
It's about addressing both the physical and lifestyle aspects.
Next up, kidney stones, those nasty little crystals that can cause so much pain.
Ugh, I've heard they're excruciating. What do they say about those?
They say it's all about excess acid and impurities in the blood, which eventually crystallize in the urinary tract.
So another example of a toxic buildup.
Exactly. And their solution: drink plenty of water, lemon, and fasting, all about flushing out those impurities.
So hydration is key. Makes sense.
Now, let's talk about tuberculosis, a serious disease that attacks the lungs.
Yeah, it can be really dangerous if not treated properly.
They describe the symptoms and explain how it's basically about weakened blood and lungs giving those TB germs a chance to take hold.
So a strong immune system is crucial for fighting it off.
Absolutely. And they talk about how things like malnutrition, overworking yourself, and even bad food combinations can weaken your immunity.
It's about nourishing your body and giving it what it needs to stay strong.
And remember those rabbits? Well, they mention them again here, saying there's a traditional belief that they have a positive influence on TB patients.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, let's move on to a topic that can be sensitive for both men and women: impotency and infertility.
It's definitely a delicate subject. The book defines impotency and lists a whole range of causes, from mental and emotional stress to physical ailments and, excessive seminal loss.
So it's a complex issue with a lot of potential contributing factors.
They emphasize a holistic approach, treating both the physical and mental aspects. They discuss yogic practices, dietary changes, and the importance of self-control.
Makes sense. It's about finding balance in all areas of life.
Now, let's talk about high blood pressure. It's so common these days, almost like a modern epidemic.
It's scary how many people are affected by it.
They attribute it to a lack of physical activity, eating too much in general, and consuming too many protein-rich foods.
So basically, our modern lifestyle is a major contributor.
It seems that way. And they warn about the serious consequences if left untreated, like heart problems and internal bleeding.
It's a wake-up call to take better care of ourselves.
Definitely. Okay, moving on to elephantiasis, a condition that causes extreme swelling.
That's one you don't see very often, thankfully.
They link it to contaminated blood, weak shukra flows, remember that vital essence, and swelling of the shukrabahanarii, which are the vessels that carry shukra.
So it's like a blockage in that vital flow, leading to swelling.
Exactly. They recommend a healthy lifestyle, proper hygiene, and those yogic practices to improve the flow of shukra.
Keeping those channels open and flowing.
Now let's talk about asthma, a respiratory condition that can be really debilitating.
It's amazing how many people suffer from asthma these days.
They connect it to contaminated air, think pollution, and stuff weakened lungs, and an imbalanced diet.
So both environmental and internal factors play a role.
Absolutely. They recommend eating alkaline foods, avoiding acidic ones, and practicing specific yogic techniques for the lungs.
Breathing exercises, I'm guessing?
Yep. Okay, let's move on to leukoderma, a skin condition that affects pigmentation.
What causes that?
They say it's linked to contaminated blood and weakened skin, basically an internal imbalance affecting the outer layer.
So taking care of your overall health is reflected in your skin.
Exactly. They recommend avoiding constipation, a balanced diet, and of course those yogic practices.
It's all connected.
And lastly, let's talk about nocturnal emissions, a common concern especially for young men.
Yeah, it can be a bit embarrassing to talk about.
They acknowledge that it's a natural physiological process, but that it can sometimes become excessive. They point to both physical and mental emotional triggers.
So it's about finding that balance again, right?
Absolutely. They warn about the potential consequences of excessive seminal loss, like weakened brain function and low energy.
It's like losing that vital life force.
And their advice is simple: healthy lifestyle, self-control, and good hygiene.
Practical steps anyone can take. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. What's next?
Well, we've still got more to uncover, including some broader lifestyle recommendations. We'll get into all that in the final part of our deep dive. All right, welcome back for the last part of our deep dive into yogic treatments and natural remedies. We've covered so much already, it's amazing how much there is to learn.
It's like, I don't know, opening up this whole new world of healing and well-being.
Right. It's not just about treating individual symptoms, it's about understanding the whole system.
And how everything's connected, you know?
Exactly. Like, remember how we were talking about all those weird terms? Well, the glossary at the back of the book is a lifesaver.
Oh yeah, that glossary is like essential for understanding all those like Sanskrit words and stuff.
Like Shukrabaha Nari. I had no idea what that meant until I looked it up.
It's basically like the vessels that carry that vital life force, the shukra, throughout the body, right?
Yeah. It's like this whole network of channels,
Yeah.
keeping everything energized.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
And it just shows how everything we do, like what we eat, how we think, even how we breathe, affects that flow of energy.
Totally. And don't forget about those three principles, the Vayu, Pitta, and Kapha. The glossary explains those really well too.
Oh yeah, the glossary is like a mini lesson in itself.
So Vayu is like the wind, right?
Yeah.
All about movement and energy flow.
Yep. And Pitta is like the fire, responsible for digestion and heat.
And Kapha is like the structure, stability, and fluids.
They're like the building blocks of our system.
It's a whole new way of understanding the body.
And the glossary also defines all those natural ingredients used in the remedies.
Oh yes, some of those names are pretty wild.
Like trifala. It sounds like something out of a Harry Potter book.
But it's actually just a combination of 3 fruits that have been used in Ayurvedic medicine for centuries.
It's amazing how they knew about the healing power of plants, way back then.
They were definitely in tune with nature.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will remember?
Well, for me, it's the reminder that true health is a journey, not a destination. It's about being mindful, listening to your body, and making choices that support your overall well-being.
It's like a lifelong practice, right? Always learning and growing.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. Just start with small steps like paying attention to your breath, getting some fresh air, trying some of those dietary tips.
Every little bit counts.
And if you're really intrigued by all this, I definitely recommend checking out the full book, Yogic Treatments and Natural Remedies. It's full of fascinating insights.
It's like a treasure trove of ancient wisdom. But of course, we always have to add the disclaimer that this is just for informational purposes. It's important to consult with a qualified healthcare professional for any specific health concerns.
Absolutely. This is not a replacement for medical advice.
All right, folks, that's it for our deep dive into yogic treatments and natural remedies. We hope you enjoyed the journey and learned something new along the way.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Until next time, stay curious, stay healthy, and keep those energy channels flowing.